for the invite. I have done one or other of these Lenten series for the United Church of the San Juans in Ridgeway, and so it's nice to kind of get back to this and be part of the Lenten spirit here. So my name is Kelly Thompson. I'm the program director for Hope Weston Hospice in Montrose. We are Western Slope's only nonprofit hospice, and I'll talk a little bit more in depth about that and why that's important. I do think it's very important. So I'm going to start with just a little bit of how many of you, and I was just counting how many people are here, and it's amazing. 30% of you already. So I know you two ladies and Eden, and so it's interesting how the paths cross here. But how many of you are familiar with Hope West beyond that? Okay, or have had a hospice experience of some sort? Okay, all right, good. So Hope West and Grand Junction. Okay, very good. So we have been around for 30 years. That's pretty amazing as a nonprofit organization, but we started 30 years ago. As I said, we're the only nonprofit organization on the Western Slope. And I'm going to show you just a little bit of the importance of our mission and the evolution of Hope West, how we started. We weren't always Hope West. We started with a very long, convoluted name. This is not my slideshow, so I'm kind of, so hospice, let's talk a little bit about hospice, because it's interesting culturally. If you go into a Hispanic culture, hospice has very negative connotations. And so that's something that we're having to learn to bridge with our population here. But really what it means is a lodging for travelers. And what we feel that we are is that walk alongside for that last journey of life. So it kind of is fitting that it's a lodging or a place of comfort. And then in more of a contemporary, it's a program designed to provide palliative care. So palliative being the relief of pain, whether that be existential grief, whether that be spiritual, emotional, or physical pain. And so that is the understanding that we have of hospice these days. So when I get a preview here, I think, there we go. So palliative care, we also do palliative care. And it literally took me about 4 years working for hospice before I could finally understand the difference between palliative care and hospice care. So hospice care is really the care that is provided when a person has a 6-month or less diagnosis for their disease process. Palliative care can be at any part of that journey. So we don't need that 6 months or less diagnosis to do palliative care. But really what we try to do is reduce the violence of a disease, whether that be the pain or the discomfort, or the spiritual, emotional anxiety of the disease, and we're trying to support the patient and the family through that process. So, and it's derived from the Latin root, I love this, palliare, which means to cloak. So we oftentimes think of ourselves as coming in and wrapping our arms around the patient and family. So the hospice movement started in Great Britain by a lady named Dame Cicely Saunders. She has since passed away, but it really started in 1967 in Great Britain, as I said, because she was a nurse in a hospital, and she noticed that when people had been diagnosed with a disease and that it was very clear that they were going to be passing soon, she said the tendency was to put them in the farthest wing, the farthest room, and basically kind of close the door. And she said it just outraged her. And she said, this is not what we should be doing to people in their final days. So, of course, in 1969, a little closer to home, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, of course, she was an import from Europe, but did live in the United States. So I'm sure we're familiar with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Okay, and she defined the stages of grief and dying. And then in 1974, we had Florence Wald, the Dean of Yale School of Nursing, and she founded the first hospice in the United States. So not that long ago. When you think about back to 1974, it's like I remember those days. So barely, but I do. So, and then this is Dame Cicely Saunders. This is really what she rooted her whole hospice movement in. You matter because you are you, and you matter to the end of your life. So it was really about experiencing the best possible life you could have to the very, very end. And so, um, so we do all we can not only to help you die peacefully, but also to help you live until you die. So I'm gonna address one of the misconceptions about hospice right now that sometimes we have to really fight, and that is we do not accelerate death, nor do we prolong life. And it's so unfortunate that some people think we kind of step in and kind of move things along. And we do not do that. That's called homicide, and it is illegal. So we don't do that. We don't do that. So I just want to make that really clear. A lot of times we have patients, families, and really this is really more rooted in their grief of losing somebody. We come in and yes, we may administer morphine to help relieve pain and symptoms and get that patient comfortable. And very soon after that administration of that drug, they do pass. It's not because of the drug, it's because their body was finally able to relax and nature took over. So I think that's where that comes from a lot of times is right on the heels of a patient being comfortable, they go. And the other thing that we see a lot of times is when a loved one comes in and says, it's okay, go, we'll be fine. And then like within minutes, they're gone. So it's a beautiful experience. It really is. We've had nurses that have been in the labor and delivery, and then they become hospice nurses, and they say, we have realized that it is just as beautiful on one end of life as it is on the other end of life. So this is a picture of Dame Cicely Saunders. She went on to become a medical doctor. She influenced Dr. Balfour Mount, who was a physician from Canada who also kind of introduced that concept of hospice and palliative care to the Canadian people. 1980, our federal government made hospice a Medicare and Medicaid benefit for all Americans. So I don't know if you even know that, but that is a benefit that we all have as American citizens, that if we go under hospice care, either Medicaid or Medicare will pay for that. So, and that was pretty instrumental in 1980. The World Health Organization recognized palliative care as a distinct specialty dedicated to relieving suffering and improving the quality of life for patients in life-limiting illnesses. So all that is part of that benefit. So we started in 1993 by a compilation of care providers in Grand Junction. It was Community Hospital, Hilltop, Rocky Mountain Health Plan, St. Mary's Medical Center, and VA Medical Center all got together with this lady named Christy Whitney. And Christy Whitney was the pioneer of our organization. She retired just 2 years ago, but this lady was a visionary. I mean, I think she may have been part of the build it and they will come mentality, and there was never a concern about a price tag because it was the right thing to do. So as I say, I didn't build this, so sometimes I'm wondering, okay, yeah, so 1993, these 5 entities just came together and said, we need to do something for Western Slope for our aging and ill population. There's Christy on the left there, and she looks a little different today. Don't we all? So this is sobering to me. In 1995, 72% of all hospices were declared nonprofit institutions. We did this because this is what you do to help people at the end of life. It's altruistic, it's compassionate, it's humanitarian. Look at how those numbers have flipped. In 2020, only 27% remain nonprofit. That's because people have figured out, I can make money at this. And it's even higher, and it's about 73% of the hospices are for profit. So I'm just super proud of working for a nonprofit. And that doesn't mean that we're not concerned with our bottom line and that we have to be in the black like anybody else. But we take that money is reinvested into patient care. We're not answering to people who are investors. They're not looking for a return. Our investors are our communities that we serve. And so that's where we put our money is back into the programs.
My dad died at the hospice in Grand Junction, and I happened to go down the rabbit hole one night in hospice care on the internet, and I started reading all these horror stories and so forth, and finally somebody came in and said, wait a minute, you guys are talking about for-profit centers. I mean, they were talking about lack of care and all that, and he said you're comparing apples to oranges in some ways. And so he was saying the best thing you can do is find a nonprofit. At least the guy, it was a physician that came in there and said, if you have access to a nonprofit, try to go to the nonprofit.
And I'll share. So about 3 weeks ago, the surviving spouse of one of our former patients brought in a magazine, and he's a scientist, and it was a space. I think it was a space journal. It has to do with space. And he said, I was shocked to find this article in here, and it was about the misservice or the service disparity between hospices, for-profit and nonprofit. And it was interesting that it was in this article. But one of the things they highlighted, out of 81 countries kind of surveyed for end-of-life services, do you want to know where the United States ranked?
Oh my God, I want to know.
43 out of the worst places to die. And the article was attributing it all to the minimal care that is provided for profits, because again, you have these investors. And so I'm not here to despair anybody, because I know there are great hospices out there that are for profit, and I know there's some nonprofits that are struggling. But it is interesting to me, and it made a lot of sense, and they were focusing on that last week of life. And we send out nurses or CNAs or social workers every day, as long as the family is wanting that. Sometimes the family says not today. But we put those patients on what we call daily visits to make sure the patient and his family are supported well. That costs money. That costs money. And so it made sense when they explained that a for-profit is not going to be, much open to that. We are also rated on how many visits a patient will get in the last week, and I'll talk a little bit of that later, and I'm going to give you some information to take home. But there's a hospice rating on how many visits did that patient have, and the article highlighted the disparity there too, how few. So our vision to be the region's leading provider of serious illness, I do believe we are. Our ratings show that. Our patient surveys, our patient family surveys show that. And so do we hit the mark 100% every single time? No, because we're human. But we take those experiences and we really try to learn from them and say, what can we do differently? I'll never forget in my orientation, one of the CFO of our organization told the story of a patient who was in our care facility, and they were of Eastern religious background. And of course, we kept coming in. Do you guys need anything? Kept coming in, cleaning him, kept coming in. And we learned later that the daughter was, sorry, this always chokes me up. The daughter was trying to send her father's spirit. That was part of their culture. And we kept interrupting that. And so when that was shared with us, it was like, oh my gosh, we have to be aware of this, the differences. Sorry, that just always chokes me up. So anyway, um, we really try to learn from the things that maybe we could have done better. So our mission through creativity, volunteerism, and philanthropy, we profoundly change the experiences of aging, illness, and grief one family at a time. And I know we've got volunteers here in the room and people who have experienced our services, but we have just about 1,400 volunteers across the organization that help us do what we do. We couldn't do it without them. I'm getting ready for our gala, which is this weekend. It's our biggest fundraiser, and that's the thing that allows us to do those daily visits because we're not worried about our investors. You're our investors. So that allows us to do those daily visits. The profits from Heirlooms for Hospice allows us to do those. Philanthropy, people giving memorial donations. So that's how we can do that work. So our values: honor and respect, open and curiosity, personal accountability, enjoyment and appreciation, wisdom seeking, empathy, spirit of volunteerism, generosity and service, and teamwork with trust. And it's interesting because every time we get somebody that we're interviewing for a position, we refer to these values and they say, that was the one thing that sold me on, I want to work there. Because, and we live by these. We live by these every day. So just a quick timeline, 1993 is when we started. 1994, this was interesting to me, Plateau Valley. Anybody know where Plateau Valley is? It's up on Grand Mesa between Colburn and the town of Mesa. Little tiny area. I mean, it's a huge area, but tiny communities. They have about 18 hospice patients up there right now. So well served. 1995, our Delta office opened. 1996, we used to call it the Black Tie and Boots Gala. So it's just our gala now. But and then 1997, our first Camp Good Grief for children. I'll talk a little bit more about how expansive our programs are. In 2000, Heirlooms for Hospice first opened in Grand Junction. We still have 3 stores now. So that's in Grand Junction, Delta, and Montrose. They're all on Main Street. Yeah. Can't miss it. Yeah. And then in 2008, our Ferris Hospice Care Center opened. And so that's where your father was, is that? Yeah. Okay, so that's our care center. It's a 13-bed care center. It's not a residential care center, so people don't go there to live. But typically we send them there because they're having pain or symptom management issues that we want to get under control. The intention is for them to go back home, because where do you want to be? I want to be home. I want to be home. And so not all of them make it, unfortunately. As I told you, sometimes when that pain and symptoms are relieved, that's when they let go. So 2008, so in the bottom of that, we have Spoon's Bistro and Bakery. Who's eating at Spoon's? Yeah. It's great food. It's great food. And so Spoon's Bistro and Bakery. Christy Whitney, as I said, was a visionary. She wanted people to know about us before they needed us. So we had a coffee shop there. We have the restaurant. Really just a lot of services that she thinks is important. I want people to not, because most people, it's the rug been pulled out from under them. You go into the hospital because something happened and you've been told this news, and it's like, wait, I'm feeling fine. And so, well, you're not feeling fine if you're at the hospital, but sometimes that diagnosis is just like, I have no idea. I have a friend right now whose 42-year-old son has just been diagnosed with, his pancreatic cancer and mets to the liver. So he's, he had no idea. He had no idea. So talk about the rug being pulled out from you.
This is great because if there's family with a loved one there,
yes,
you can just go down and
yep.
It's a beautiful restaurant.
Yes, it is.
Great outdoor area.
Yeah.
And Charlie for years has gone to prime rib dinner with his grandmother once a year.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Good. Yeah. And they do carry out meals and all that. So in 2016, we've been around longer than this. So we've been in Montrose for 27 years. The organization celebrated 30 years. We opened our office in Montrose 3 years after the Grand Junction. But that's our building there. We're right across Nevada from the hospital. And so our Montrose Center opens. The Bacon Center for Living Your Best is up in Grand Junction. That's a huge 3-story complex that we purchased just a few years ago. And that's where our PACE program is. So PACE is program for all-inclusive care for the elderly. And that is run in Montrose by Volunteers of America. So you can only have one per county, although they're looking at changing that. But
My daughter-in-law just started working for us.
Up in Junction?
Here.
Oh, here in,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, great, yeah. And then last year we celebrated 30 years, so we're on to 31 now. Okay, so just a little comparison. We used to be Hospice of the Grand Valley, and then we went to Hospice and Palliative Care of the Uncompahgre Valley. That was and they decided, let's just go to Hope West. But look at the volunteers. And really, we're about 1,400 now. Because of PACE and Grand Junction, our team members are about 450 now versus that 425. They've been doing massive hiring there. So look at the number of patients that we've cared for. So, and that's across the 3 regions. So we are in Grand Junction, Delta, Montrose, 5 regions, excuse me, Plateau Valley, and then Meeker just does palliative care. They don't have a hospice team up there. So we used to just do hospice and palliative care. Now we've added PACE, adult grief support, and Hope West Kids. So Hope West Kids is our children's bereavement. Because we do receive Medicare and Medicaid benefits, they help pay for that. We're required to provide services, but none of that's funded. So that's why we have heirlooms. That's why we have golf tournaments. That's why we have gala. That's why we have philanthropy. But we could do bereavement this deep. We could say, okay, on the second Thursday of every month, everybody come in a big room. We'll all get together and we'll pour our hearts out and we'll help you feel better. And we could check that box and say, okay, we provide grief support. So this is another thing. I'm going to just challenge you to think how would that look differently for a for-profit? So what we do for adults is we meet one-on-one, we have groups, we have reoccurring groups, we have family sessions called Forget-Me-Nots, where it includes grandma, mom and dad, aunts and uncles, children, whoever is experiencing the grief. So we go pretty deep with those. The children are even more so. We see them in school groups. Right now, my bereavement counselor for the children is seeing children in 8 schools, so that's 5 elementary schools, 2 junior high, and the high school. Did I add up to 8 there? And it's about 60 kids that she's seeing. And she does that on 20 hours. I don't know how she does it. For kids, we also do one-on-one counseling. We do the Forget-Me-Not that I just mentioned with the families. We have equine therapy. We have this phenomenal farm in Montrose that has EGALA trained horses. So EGALA is an acronym that I'm not even going to try to remember, but basically these are horses and therapists that have been trained to work with grief. And you will not believe it until you see it, how these horses can make such an impactful difference on these kids. So we have Camp Good Grief. We have Itty Bitty Camp, which is for those little 3 and 4 years old that can't really be away from mom and dad for the night, but are still experiencing grief. So we have that camp in Grand Junction. So I'm not going to read all this to you, but I'm going to let you just take a look at it for a minute. And if you have any questions, I can answer them for you. I think a lot of them I've already talked about. This Rocky Transitions in Care. This is if anybody has Rocky Mountain Health Plans. We have a collaboration with them for palliative care where we can step in and kind of help with some of the cares there.
Now United Health.
Right.
So, but
Yeah.
it's still.
Yeah. Well, most people know them as Rocky Mountain, but you're right.
Sure.
You're exactly right. So these are all the patients that are served in 2023. So a 13-bed facility, look at that number in a year's time, almost 600. Yeah. So, and that's our region. The only place we are not at, and we can't figure out how to do it where we could actually even break even, is the West End. Nucla, Natarita, Norwood.
Yeah,
It's a healthcare desert there.
it is, it is. Is there any way you can go through the Unitarian clinic there?
We have looked at that. We have looked at that. It's not something we've given up on, but we haven't been able to.
It's, I mean, that is such a sad area.
Yeah, and lots of
And actually, shame
need
on
there.
Montrose for leaving.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But say that again, I'm sorry.
Shame on Montrose for just like abandoning. I mean,
Well,
Montrose County.
the problem is the commute. So,
Yeah.
it's a 2-hour trip there on a bright sunny day, and then you throw a day like this in.
Yeah.
And no one wants to be traveling over Norwood Hill. So, okay. I see we're coming down on some time here, so I'm going to skip a little bit of some of these informations. These are really just some additional numbers. I want to just say that hospice isn't, we always think of hospice as being for cancer people and older people. And I have been to 3 funerals this year, all of them patients of ours. One was 35, one was 59, and one was 54. So it's not what we think it would be. So it can be chronic respiratory condition, heart condition. So it's not always just the cancers. Hopefully I brought you a little bit more understanding of palliative care. It's at any stage of the disease. It's a transition between late life and end of life. We implement to current treatments. So a patient can be on chemotherapy or radiation, and we can see them palliatively. It's typically paid by insurance, so it's not a Medicare, Medicaid benefit, but typically people have insurance that will take care of it. And yes, and if they don't, we do provide a sliding care scale for our care. Sliding scale for our care. There we go. Do you ever have days like that?
Oh yeah. These folks know it.
So, but our one of our things that I also am very proud of is that we never turn down a patient because of their ability to pay. Just about every year I've got at least one patient that is a hospice patient that is, it's all scholarship. So hospice, we do have to have the prognosis of 6 months or less. So I'm going to dispel another miscommunication here or misunderstanding, is that if I sign on to hospice, I'm never getting off. Not true. We can sign people onto hospice. The very next week, your oncologist calls you and says, oh my gosh, there's this great new treatment I just heard about. I think you're perfect for it. You call us up and say, I want to seek aggressive treatment. Fine, we'll come out with a discharge paper. Now, what we don't like to do is walk away from you. We'll say, how about if we back off into palliative care? That way we can still be involved and we can still kind of help you walk through that journey. So we don't have imaginary fish hooks that we hook into you and we got you now. So
it's a joke, my grandmother flunked hospice twice.
Mhm.
So she's the one that lived to 103.
Yeah.
So it was like, okay, I think you're all right. Well, then she went back in. Okay, I think you're okay.
We call it graduating.
Yeah,
So you
yeah.
graduated from hospice. And then
That's good.
the other misunderstanding is, well, what if I don't die in 6 months? Yeah, we're not giving you an expiration date at all. That's if the disease follows its normal progression. So we just had a patient last week, 5 years with us. So it just means that at 6 months, our physician has to evaluate and say, yes, that you still have the disease. If it progresses like it normally progresses, we would think that you would succumb within 6 months. So, as I say, we've had patients on for years and years. We don't typically like that because those cause audits from the federal government that can be very expensive for us, and so. But anyway, there's no gotcha on this.
In my own experience and my clinical pastoral education, I spent in a hospital basically mostly with hospice patients. And I can remember one in particular where I spent 2 days praying the rosary over someone who wasn't expected to live. I went back the third day. She was in the TV room watching TV, just having a good time. And I'm like, what the heck happened? And
Yeah.
just like that, just in and out of hospice.
You're laying on hands, did something, I guess.
Yeah. So, but yeah, that's the wonderful thing is, and I agree that's that thing that most people misunderstand is that once in hospice doesn't mean you're going to stay in hospice, and
Right.
it doesn't mean you're going to die right away. It's
right.
It's
And
really
it doesn't
about
mean you're
care.
going to die of your disease. Your disease. My own father, who I could tell my mother was burning out. I said, Dad, how about if we get you guys some help? How about palliative? I don't need those people in my house. Those people? Dad, I'm one of those people. What does that mean? And right away I'm thinking, okay, he thinks we're going to come in and accelerate things.
Yeah.
I don't know what. I never had that conversation with him. But he finally agreed to have Julie Lowther come out. Julie Lowther is one of our amazing nurses. And she said, Fred, what do you think's happening to you? And he says, well, I'm dying. She says, okay, well, how do you feel about that? He says, I'm fine. I've lived a great life. He was 89. And he said, I've lived a great life and I'm ready to go. And she said, well, what do you want that to look like? And he said, right here in this chair. I want to be sitting in this chair. And she said, then I think you need us. Because if we're not involved, there's going to be an event, possibly. You're going to end up going somewhere you don't want to be. You're going to have things being done to you you don't want to have done to you. And my dad was like, sign me up. And, of course, he was hospice eligible. So, my palliative thing was just to get the foot in the door. And so, anyway, he signed up. He did not die from his disease. He died from an event. So it was probably a heart attack. He'd had 2 before, but he had respiratory issues. And so that's not what he died from. I mentioned all of these with the exception of Open Studio, which is an art program that we have kids come to, and they do projects that help them express their grief and handle that. We do 2 memorials a year, just so that families can kind of come and we remember their loved one. So, look at the ways you can volunteer here. So we've had volunteers in our itty bitty camp, Camp Good Grief, patient and family support. We have people that go and spell the loved ones so they can have an hour or 2 to go have coffee with somebody. Heirlooms for Hospice, Hope West Kids volunteers. That would be the art therapy and the groups, camp groups. Tanglewood Gardens, we have volunteers that come take care of our gardens. We have a gorgeous memorial garden in our facility here, as they do in Grand Junction. So lots of different ways to volunteer. We have a lot of volunteers that come just for the gala. So we'll be seeing a lot of them tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. This is what our volunteers think of us. So overall satisfaction, 4.88 out of 5. That's not bad. And a 4.93 willingness to recommend. So again, we try to make everybody happy. Sometimes we miss that mark. So this just highlights spoons. If you haven't eaten there, next time you're in Junction, we're right off Patterson and 12th. So
Really lovely outdoor
yeah.
area.
And they'll give you a tour of that, not in the patient's rooms, of course, but the upstairs is where all the patient rooms are. It's a 5-star hotel. One of my other favorite stories that Terry Walter, the lady I spoke of earlier, is there was a homeless man in Grand Junction and, living under the bridges and all that, and very ill. And his friends took him into the ER, and, he was obviously at end of life. He was already shutting down, and they admitted him into the care center. and gave him a place of dignity. That one always chokes me up too. It's just the value of all life. We all deserve that at the end. Doesn't matter what our condition is. So our heirlooms, man, we contributed almost $500,000 to our cause last year after all the bills were paid. So we had heirlooms, the three heirloom stores together.
Come pick up.
We'll come pick up.
They had a big truck at her.
Yeah.
Beautiful furniture.
Yeah.
I went
You
down
didn't
there and
need
they
it.
go, we want it.
Yeah. Anyone can make a referral. A lot of times people will say, I think my mom, my dad needs hospice, but we can't get in the doctor, whatever. You can call up and say, hey, I think my loved one needs hospice services, or at least will you come present? Will you come talk about what you can do?
So do you need a doctor's referral?
We do. But we can pick up the ball then, and we'll start hounding the doctor. And it does have to be two doctors agree. So your primary physician and then our physician will look at all the medical records and say, yes, I do believe this person is eligible. But the nice thing is it's a two-way street. You can go back and forth. I just want people to understand that you don't, you're not locked in ever.
Oftentimes when people say, oh, they've gone to hospice, you think it's like, oh, no, they've gone to heaven.
Yeah, right.
You know, it's like,
Yeah. So I'll let you ask some questions while I hand some of this out. I want you guys to put this in that drawer where you think someday I might need this. This is how we're. Yeah, I know it's a pile. This is how we are rated by our patients' families. We have nothing to do. It's not our survey. It's the federal government survey. It's Medicare, Medicaid. We don't even get to write the survey, which is at times very confusing, and we get some convoluted answers. But this shows our rating. And we are a 4-star hospice. There are only 7 4-star hospices in the state of Colorado and only 1 5-star. We are this close to 5-star, and the Montrose office is 5-star. Our last report, we hit every marker for a 5-star. So I don't want to think, oh, 4 out of 5, well, you need to improve a little bit. It's a pretty high mark when you think about it. So, but I want you to take this because it gives you the website for where your relative in Virginia calls and says, I don't know what to do. So-and-so, my spouse is in crises and I don't have a clue what to do, and they say they need hospice, but I don't even know who to choose. There's 150 hospices in our area and I don't know who to go to. Say, oh, I've got something for you here. HospiceCompare.com. They go there, they type in their zip code. You get a full report of every hospice there, whether they're for-profit, whether they're nonprofit. There are some for-profits that have very high marks. There's some nonprofits that don't have such high marks. So that's why I'm saying, just because I'm a nonprofit doesn't mean I'm the best, although that's true here. So would you mind just passing those around? Hang on to that because it's good everywhere. It's good everywhere. You got someone in Minnesota and they can go on to that and they can find out. This is the Cliff Note version of everything I just presented to you. Just one, okay. And alrighty. It's the Cliff Notes, but it'll help you. How are you? It's so good to see you. You bet. Do you want more than one? One is good? Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. So any questions? Anything that I wasn't clear on or could better explain?
Others know this, but I don't, but your building that is pictured behind you, is that the building in Montrose?
No,
This is actually Grand Junction, but our building looks very similar because it was the same architect. So right down to the wallpaper in our office mirrors that care center and the stained glass windows and all that. So
And are there places in there for the patients?
No, so when you start talking patient care, your building expenses go up exponentially because you've got to have oxygen hookup and fire suppression and doors that automatically close. And so we do not have patient care in our building, but we also don't have that much need for it. So we have a hospice room at the hospital that we contract with them, and we have the care center. So if patients kind of really need that intense service, but they don't want to go to Grand Junction because it's a hardship, the spouse is 89 years old and doesn't really drive, we can put them in the hospice room. It's less than one body a person as far as need. So it's like 0.93 of a person in need for a hospice center in Montrose. So we had land donated to us years ago, and if we didn't build within a certain period, it reverted back to the family, and so that land went back to them. That's the good news. Bad news is that we don't have that need. However, we are serving well over 100 patients just in Montrose now. That is our new norm. We're fluctuating between 104 and 108 patients on any given day, and about 30 palliative care.
Have you seen those numbers go up, or do you expect them to go up?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've been in this position for about 7 years, almost 7 years. And when I first came into my position, we were running in 55 to 60 patients. I remember the time we hit 65 and the whole team was freaking out. It's like, how are we going to take care of them? And then we kind of we're jumping by tens, you know. Then 70 to 75 was our norm, and then 80 to 85. We were in the 90s, and probably for about the last 6 months, 5 months, probably 5 months, we have been steadily in the hundreds.
Same thing in Grand Junction.
Grand Junction is a little more even keel. Plus, there's stiff competition up there. They have probably 4 other hospices up there. We really only have one in Montrose that is very competitive with us. Yeah, we're the only one on the entire western slope. Yeah. So.
Okay.
All righty, it's 7 o'clock.
Nicely done. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciated being here. Thank you.
Thanks for braving the drive.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
So folks, again, thank you all for joining us tonight and for the whole sessions. I'm glad that those have stuck out with us. Next week is all about wrapping it all up. And my Notary Public stamp finally came in. And so I am a Notary Public for the state of Colorado. And so if you have a will or something like that you're working on and need to have notarized, I'll be happy to do that next week. If there's anything else that you guys need to work on, but you know my main goal has always been, from day one, I want your funeral plans.
I know.
Okay? So that's what really...
You know what he told me? He said, just plan a day for me. And I go, oh,
No.
okay.
So,
He doesn't want to do any work.
So again, my whole goal is to have a funeral plan for every member of this church in our files, so that when this does happen, we know exactly what you want as far as an Episcopal funeral service goes. I'll be happy to store anything else that you want in there. Obviously, we don't want financial information, things like that. But as we've gone through all this paperwork for these entire few weeks, you know, we've talked about all these things that we really should try to have as our final gift to our family members. We want to make sure and help facilitate that. And I hope that this has been helpful. And then, again, next week, anything else we want to wrap up on, we'll talk about a few more of those topics. But my main focus for next week is going to be to have everyone bring in a funeral plan.
Doesn't have to be next week. Maybe 3 or 4 months.
Well, let's bring it in, and let's start working on it. Okay, bring the stuff in that we have. And I'm really interested in those 2-3 pages that I had that were really about the Episcopal funeral service. Making sure you pick the scriptures that you want to hear, because like I said, I hate when someone comes in and says, I don't know what scripture they like the most. And I'm like, do you have a Bible that's been highlighted? Anything like that? And they have nothing, you know. And so it's like, let's get ahead of this a little bit so that when this does happen, our families don't have to question, ask, and or just flat out say, I don't go to church, I don't care. And I've had enough of that too. Because I've had plenty of people say, I just don't do church anymore, so I have no idea what to even think. And so they'll see.
Mark, could we Could we have Phil come and do all those songs so we can pick up which one?
Yeah, can we have him just play it?
Just play right here, I can see about getting it programmed or something, and we can see what happens.
I heard that.
Name
Yeah,
that too.
Make us a CD.
3 notes.
Here you go.
Oh, name that too. Name it
Okay.
and name that him. Name that him.
All right, well, thank y'all again.
Right.
Thank you, Carol, thank you so much for dinner. It was wonderful. Y'all have a good
Can
night.
you notarize the will? I wrote one out on the back of
The
an envelope.
napkin.
I can, as long as it doesn't exclude certain.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
I say, don't forget music in that.
Yes. Oh, no,
Yeah,
it's all part of it.
I had to sing Send in the Clowns.
Oh, my
It
God.
was his favorite song.
Well, it's kind of a nice song. I
It is
mean,
a nice
the
song,
but-
title is bad, but
Okay.
For a funeral. Oh, my gosh.
And thank God the minister that was doing the